They told us the long span took 6 hours for cadets who finished it at all, and that most didn't finish. Drillmaster Vay Ashrun said this the way he said everything. Flat, unhurried, the twin vents at his throat flaring once for punctuation, and nothing more. He stood at the head of the yard with his arms folded into sleeves long enough to cover his hands, because Thren's skin doesn't hold heat the way ours does, and he looked at the 7 of us lined up on the gravel the way a man looks at a column of figures he has already added. He had already added me before I arrived. I'd seen it in the margin of my intake file, stamped in the pale advisory font the registrar reserves for things cadets aren't supposed to read upside down. Diminishing cohort designation. Humane accommodation protocols apply. Someone 3 administrations back had pulled human casualty counts from an old skirmish report, decided the numbers described a species in decline, rather than a single bad century, and written it into the Academy's reference tables. Nobody since had thought to check the math. I hadn't bothered to correct it. It wasn't worth the meeting. The long span ran 9 kilometers through broken ground, scree, dry wash, 2 ridgelines steep enough to need both hands, out to a beacon post and back. At the halfway point, set into a low arch of pale stone, hung a single amber lamp. Cadets called it the gate. Step through it, raise your hand, and a transport would carry you back to the yard with no mark against your file. Vay Ashrun had ordered it built the cycle before I enrolled. Specifically, the other cadets told me, because of the new designation on my intake sheet. He had never said so to my face. He didn't need to. The gate's existence was the sentence. You will be evaluated on completion, not on speed, he told us at the marker line, vents flaring. There is no shame in the amber gate. The span was not built with every species in mind. A cadet named Brask, broad and gray-plated, glanced sideways at me when he said it. I kept my eyes on the ridgeline and said nothing. Saying something would have required explaining a fact about Earth that nobody at Halvern Institute had ever asked me about directly, that long before any of us put on a uniform, ordinary people back home spent their weekends running distances that would have flattened most of the cadets standing in that yard, for no reason except that they wanted to know they could. Nobody handed out a humane accommodation for a marathon. You signed up, you paced yourself, and if you blew up at kilometer 30, it was because you'd misjudged your own legs, not because the distance had been unfair to you. I'd run my first one at 16, badly, going out too fast and walking the last 6 kilometers with my father pacing the sidewalk beside me on his bike, saying nothing useful, just staying close. I'd run a dozen more after that, slower at first, then smarter, until the going out too fast part stopped happening at all. None of that was in my intake file. The Institute's archive on humans ran maybe 40 pages, most of it casualty tables from a skirmish 2 generations back, and nobody had thought to ask what an ordinary Tuesday looked like for the species they were filing reports on. Vay Ashrun believed what the 40 pages told him. I didn't blame him for that. I just didn't think it was going to matter today. The horn sounded, and we went. Brask front-loaded everything, the way Thren always did. Explosive output, then a hard physiological floor where the body simply stopped and waited out a recovery window nobody could argue with. He was a kilometer ahead of the rest of us, inside 20 minutes, and walking by the first ridge. A cadet named Oren dropped to a crouch at the second wash, vents working hard, eyes glassy, and didn't get up again until the recovery team reached her. By the time the ground started to climb toward the gate, I was running alone, near the back of the field, holding a pace I'd settled into before the horn finished sounding. It is not an exciting thing to watch, pacing. There is no moment in it that looks like triumph. You run the first third slower than feels right. You run the middle third at a number you've already decided on and refuse to renegotiate, no matter what your lungs argue. You save something, not much, just enough, for the last quarter, when the ground stops being generous. It's a discipline, not a talent, and the only thing that makes it hard is that it asks you to ignore every instinct telling you to go faster while you still feel good. The amber gate came up out of the haze at kilometer 4.5, hung in its low stone arch like something a tired god had left behind. 3 cadets stood near it already. Oron, recovered enough to walk, but done for the day. Brask, sitting in the gate's shade with his head between his knees. A transfer cadet named Elo, who'd simply stopped at the line and looked at me as I passed, like he was waiting to see whether I'd stop too. Drill Master Ve Ashrun stood 20 meters off, watching the same way. I didn't slow down at the gate. I didn't speed up either. The second half of the span looked, from where I was running, exactly like the first half. Scree, dry wash, a long climb, the beacon post somewhere past the ridge I couldn't see yet. I had budgeted for it that way on purpose, back at the start line, when nobody had been watching me close enough to notice I was doing math. The second ridge took longer than the first. My legs had started telling me things by then. Small, manageable lies about how much farther I could reasonably go, and I ignored them in the specific, practiced way you learn from doing this for years, on ground that didn't care whether you finished. The beacon post, when it came, was unremarkable. A pole, a light, a turnaround flag. I touched it because the rules said to, and started back. Going back is where the span actually tests you, because by then you know exactly how much it's already taken, and exactly how much further it intends to ask. The second ridge again, the rock face warmer now under a sun that had climbed while I wasn't watching it. The second wash, drier now, the gravel loosened by everyone who'd crossed it ahead of me, my footing less certain than it had been on the way out. My breathing had settled into something mechanical, in for 4 strides, out for 4, a count I'd been running since the start line without deciding to. Somewhere behind the second ridge a recovery flyer passed low overhead, going out for Oron, and the downdraft kicked grit into my eyes and I blinked it clear and kept moving. I didn't think about the gate. I'd stopped thinking about it somewhere around kilometer 6, the same way you stop thinking about an exit on a long drive once you've already decided you're not taking it. I crossed the marker line at 4 hours and 11 minutes, by my own count, nowhere near a record, nothing worth a stopwatch story, just inside the standard, with enough left in my legs to walk the last 100 meters instead of staggering them. Ve Ashrun was waiting at the line with a data slate already lit. He didn't ask how I felt. Thren don't, generally. It isn't a category they think in. He looked at the time, then at me, then back at the slate, and his vents went still in a way I hadn't seen them do before. "You did not use the gate," he said, not a question. "No," I said. "The accommodation exists for a reason. It exists for a reason somebody guessed at," I said. I didn't need it today. He didn't argue the point, and he didn't apologize for it either. That wasn't going to happen, and I hadn't expected it to. He turned the slate toward himself, entered something with 2 fingers, and turned away to log the rest of the field coming in behind me. Brask finished an hour later, walking the last stretch with his hands on his knees. Oren didn't finish at all, and nobody held it against her. The gate existed for cadets like her too, not just for the line on my file. I didn't see what Ve Ashrun had written until 3 days later, when the registrar called me in to confirm a correction to my standing file. The diminishing cohort line was gone. In its place, in the same pale advisory font, sat a single sentence. Baseline reclassified. No accommodation required. I folded the printout once and put it in my jacket and walked back out into a yard that looked exactly the same as it had that morning, except that nobody was looking at the amber gate when I crossed past it on my way to the next class.